So we're at the celestial King Buddha, right? Celestial is heavens, right? The stars, the skies. This Buddha represents being the brightest, the biggest, the king of all stars in the skies, the heavenly bodies in the skies. So of course, this represents Mahayana, the great vehicle. Right? We have the Hinayana, 小乘, Deuter. That's Hinayana. And then we have 大乘, Mahayana, Buddhism. So this king, this Buddha represents the ideal of Buddhism, which is Mahayana, right? Mahayana Buddhism. And of course, the core, the foundation of this Mahayana is Bodhisattva ideal, or Bodhisattva way, 菩萨道, right? 菩萨道. And within the nucleus, the center of that Bodhisattva way is Bodhisitta, the Bodhi mind, right? 菩提心, Dambode. So that's the core of Bodhisattva. So we will talk about a little bit about the origin from the historical perspective of how Bodhisattva ideal has arisen. And we will also talk about how to cause rise to the Bodhisitta, 菩提心, Bodhidam, in us. Right? So we will look at from the historical perspective and also the ideal perspective. In order to appreciate how Bodhisattva ideal arose in Buddhism, we should take a look at both the Buddha's teachings and the life, because there are two groups. One group focuses on just only the teachings of the Buddha. They put importance on the teaching of the Buddhas and not too much about the life of the Buddha. But there's another group who thinks that there should be importance. The life of the Buddha is just as important as his teachings. And it is the combination of the two, by looking at the life of the Buddha, that we want to emulate the Buddha, to help other people and not just to learn about the Buddha for ourselves. So when we put the two together, we will understand from the origin of the Bodhisattva ideal. Okay. So there are two schools of thought that we want to differentiate here and to help us understand this. So throughout the Buddha, right, after he's attained enlightenment, he went throughout India to preach, to share with others. And whether he gave a long discourse, a Dharma talk, or a short one, or he may just say nothing at all, or even just a simple smile, it influenced people more in some cases than what he said. Right? For example, like even a simple smile, that will be the start of a great sutra. Or in the Diamond Sutra, Jin Gang Jin, right? Kim Gang. It started out as the Buddha putting on his robe to go out for alms, 乞食, right? So such a great volume of sutra started out with the Buddha putting on his robe. Very simple actions. So from here we can see that Buddhism is not just the words of the Buddha, but also the life of the Buddha. Because Buddha is Buddhism. Buddhism is Buddha. He is the message. He is Buddhism. Right? And many people, when encounter the Buddha, attained enlightenment. They gained enlightenment as well. Because of his tremendous presence. When you see the Buddha, you will be in awe, and just by looking at the magnificent presence of the Buddha, his brilliant body figures, it could cause rise in a heart, joy and faith. So it's more than just what the Buddha said, but who the Buddha was and what he did. For example, Samana. Samana was a character in one of the Buddhist scriptures. He was a florist. Every day he would give flowers to the king, make offerings to the king, for king to take his bath. But one day when he saw the Buddha, his body was fused with joy, 喜乐, right? His 喜乐 was filled with joy. And that caused rise to immense faith in the Buddha. And he rather give up his life to make the offerings of flowers to the Buddha than to give to the king. By not giving to the king, he was disobeying the king's order. That would mean execution, that would mean death. But because there was so much joy in the Buddha, and seeing the Buddha, that caused rise to immense faith. And because of that, just by looking at the Buddha, he was on his way to his own Buddhahood, his Buddhahood. Right? And of course, after the Buddha's death, called parinirvana, right? Parinirvana, yesterday, Mr. Chance talked a little bit about it. But it's not death as we understand it. Nirvana is not death, but here Sankarasita says that it is an extension of his experience of enlightenment, 觉悟, right? After the Buddha had entered nirvana, the monks came together to ask a very basic question. What is Buddhism? What do we make of all the teachings, the 45 years or 49 years of teaching? What do we make of the teachings, and what is this so-called Buddhism? I mean, of course, that question back then was crucial, but it is also important today too. That's why we're learning about Buddhism. And not only that question is important, but what's maybe equally or even more important is how do we gain enlightenment? How do we achieve it? How do we achieve our Buddhahood? What is the path to the realizations of enlightenment? And that's what we are interested in. There are two different points of view. One party says Buddhism is the teachings of the Buddha. And another group says, well, the life of the Buddha, examples that he gave when he was alive, they are really as important as the teachings. How the Buddha lived his life was, if not more important than the teachings itself. Of course, I mean, that's just where the origin of trying to understand the rise of Bodhisattva way, right? Bodhisattva, Bodhisattva. So after the Buddha died, his disciples, those who learned from the Buddha, they were sad about it, and they thought that the world had lost the light. And of course, and we were told that arhats, Arahant, they remained absolutely calm and unmoved. They did not show any distress, any emotions. But because the arhats, they had realized enlightenment, and to them, Buddhahood, enlightenment, they had already gained, and it was the Buddhahood that made Buddha the Buddha, and so to them there was no loss. But to those who had not gained the arhat level, arhatship, they felt that there was a loss in the world, that the Buddha had entered nirvana. So one group is saying, we have the teachings, the doctrines, the Dharma, the rules, that's enough for us. That's what we should go for. We should go by the text, the teachings. Another group says, that's not enough. There's more to the teachings. So one group, they put all the teachings together in a called Abhidhamma. Abhidhamma is like a collections of analysis, classifications, and terms of the Buddha's teachings. It's very dry. There's no conceptual interpretation. It's just very dry analysis of the Buddha's teachings, the classifications of the Buddha's teachings. But another group felt that there was something missing from their lives, that now that the Buddha had entered nirvana. And they couldn't help thinking of the Buddha, recalling the incidents of his life that exemplify his personal qualities. right? So one side you have the teachings, the other side you have the qualities of of the Buddha. For example, there's examples of the Buddha's compassion. There's a story about how the Buddha, when he went around to visit his disciples, one time he saw an old monk lying there sick. He had what you call dysentery. Dysentery is kind of diarrhea. So he was sitting, when he was lying on his bed in his urine and excrement. So it was a terrible scene to look at. So the Buddha and Ananda was his attendant, came to the monk, and the Buddha asked, "What's happening to you? Why are you in this situation?" Then the old monk said that because he was sick and he couldn't do much. And he said that, well, I'm useless to them now because I can't do anything. And so the Buddha asked Ananda to bring new clothes, new cloth to help wipe and clean this old monk. And he admonished the other monk saying, you should be looking out for each other as brothers and sisters, right? Just because he's old now, he may not be able to do much, but it doesn't mean that he's useless. So then the Buddha says, he who wishes to serve me, let him serve the sick. Right? So it was Buddha, even though he was the teachers of man and heaven, but yet he was very compassionate even to a very old man, old monk. Right? And then there was another story of Kisa Gotami. Kisa Gotami, she had a baby, a few years old, and the only child that she had died. And she was so crazed with grief. She didn't know what to do. She wanted her son to be, or her child to be alive again. So she went to everybody in that town to ask for help. And somebody was gracious enough to point her to the Buddha because they couldn't help her. They didn't know how to bring her child back to life. So she went to the Buddha, and the Buddha didn't give her any teachings, but told her to say, I will save your child under one condition. If you can find one mustard seed, bring it to me. But not only mustard seed, but it needs to come from a family who has never experienced death. She was so happy she didn't hear the last part. She only heard about getting a mustard seed to the Buddha, bringing back to the Buddha. She went throughout town to ask for a mustard seed, but everybody say, I have mustard seed to give you, but my grandfather just died, my mother just died, my uncle, and so forth. So everybody she went to, somebody has experienced some sort of death in the family. Then she learned the lessons that death comes to all. And she finally was willing to give up her death child in a forest and went back to the Buddha and said, give me a refuge. And then she became a nun. So this story may seem very simple. Well, what can we learn from this? What do you think Kisa Gotami learned about that had enlightened her? What do you think? What do you think about why all of a sudden that she became enlightened? We heard the story, we've seen death, but yet we are not enlightened. So from this story, what can we learn? What do we really need to learn to become enlightened? And what do you think she had learned to help her become enlightened?
She learned to let go.
Let go, yeah. Obviously at the end she let go. But what's behind that? What can we learn from that? We learn to let go, but then it doesn't work for us. So what's the Buddhist teachings here? Besides of letting go, what is it that can help us to get closer to enlightenment? We are not enlightenment yet, but what is it that we can learn from this story that can help us to get closer to the teachings of the Buddha, the real meaning of his teaching. I mean, she had a dead baby. Everybody she talked to had some sort of death in the family. And then she came to realization, and then she let go. She was able to let go. How? What was going on in her head that she was able to let go? So we go back to the Buddha's teachings. And his teaching is what Mr. Chen reminds us often enough that we should understand from this story. The teachings of the Buddha is conditionality, right? 缘起法, 法缘可以. But what can we learn from what is the conditionality in this story? Well, it's not just observing death. It's not just about letting go, but she realized that in the law of conditionality, understanding it means that she understands what brought life. What has brought life. She understands what can create life. And she also understands how to prevent suffering from occurring. She understands that life is because of less desire. So we don't just let go, we understand what has brought us here, because our desire for something that has brought us here. But if we don't want to have that, then we should cut off that desire. Not to destroy it, but to prevent it from happening. Right? She realizes that life has brought us here because of some force that has brought us here. And we are the source of that force, generating that force that to bring us here. But if we don't like what we see, then we should create the conditions so that things don't occur again. Does that make sense? Right? From this story, it's not just about letting go and not just about, death, everybody faces death. But why? What causes death? And how can we prevent death from occurring? Because once we have this physical body, when we say preventing death from occurring, doesn't mean you destroy this body or you evade this body, you go to somewhere. But to provide the conditions so that you don't encounter it. So in other words, escaping from the cycle of life and death does not mean you run away to somewhere, but to have no fear, because through your clear understanding of why things happen. And if you don't like what you have, then you put in the conditions to change it. Does it make sense? And so when she realizes that the conditionality, that's when she's willing to let go. Right? When we understand something, then it's very easy to let go. But if we're forcing ourselves to let go, we can, as long as we have the energy to force ourselves to let go, we can let go, but eventually it'll spring back. 反弹, right? It'll spring back because you're suppressing it. And if you let go, it springs back, right? So it's through Buddha's compassion to teach those with the Dhamma to those so that they too can achieve that fearlessness. And fearlessness, the Buddha's fearlessness is another quality that he illustrated. Fearlessness, equanimity, meaning 舍, like 慈悲喜舍的舍, like to let go. In one story, his cousin Devadatta, very ambitious man, and he had achieved quite a bit with supernatural powers. He thought that he was qualified to lead the Sangha. And the Buddha at this point was is kind of old now. And Devadatta says, Lord, why don't you retire? I'll take over the Sangha for you, so you don't have to worry about it. The Buddha rejected that and said, I would never, under any circumstance, to turn it over to you. So publicly, he was very embarrassed. He felt offended. So he resolved to take the Buddha's life. One time he conspired with Ajatatsu, a very wicked king, and they bribed the king's elephant trainer to release a mad elephant in the Buddha's path. Right, the elephant was running towards the Buddha, and the Buddha was able to subside, calm down the elephant. Some scriptures says that the Buddha uses supernatural power to subdue the elephant. Whatever it may be, was somehow the Buddha was able to calm down the elephant. So that was a failure on Devadatta's part, trying to kill the Buddha. Another time he climbed up to the Vulture's Peak with a big boulder, big rock, right? He knew that the Buddha would often take that path. So as he saw the Buddha coming, he pushed down this boulder, and the boulder was bouncing on the hill there, but luckily it missed, and only a small splinter of rock hit the Buddha's foot. So it missed. So he again missed again to kill the Buddha. So his Buddha's disciples, knowing this, they were alarmed for the Buddha's safety. So they formed a sort of bodyguard, armed themselves with sticks to protect the Buddha. So during the night, the Buddha came out of the vihara, which is Jingse, right, where the Buddha stayed, Tensa. And the Buddha came out and said, monks, what is this? What are you doing hanging around my monastery with sticks? He said, Lord, don't worry. We are here to protect you. We're here to protect you and to ensure that you are safe. The Buddha says, the Buddha needs no protection. Now go away, go to your dwellings. So they all melted away into the night. So the Buddha was courageous. And then another story was about Angulimala, like the serial killer. He was the terror of on the countryside. Everybody ran away from him. He killed people and took their fingers and stringed them into a necklace. So everybody was afraid of this serial killer, but the Buddha was very compassionate enough to show up in the face of this killer to try to help him. Right? So it shows that the Buddha was very courageous. And so even though it's impossible to kill the Buddha, but that does not take away from the Buddha's personal courage. His fearlessness, which is one of the outstanding qualities, helped him to keep him safe from harm. Another quality of the Buddha was his stillness. As there was a story about how King Ajatatsu, Asha Shewang, Asatevu, he and his personal physician, Jivaka, who later on became a Buddhist physician, the doctors as well. One night, they decided to go visit the Buddha. So he and 500 of his men and the ladies on elephants marching towards the monastery of the Buddha in the forest to visit the Buddha in the deep forest. And while they were walking, they couldn't hear anybody except for the elephants walking. And Ajatatsu was kind of weary about this because he was afraid that somebody had set him up, because they were supposed to meet the Buddha with 2,500 disciples. You imagine a group of 22,500 people and you don't hear anything. Where am I going? Is this a setup? And that's what the king was thinking. But Jivaka says, don't worry, Your Majesty, there's no trap. I'm taking you to the Buddha. But he was still not convinced. He said, we should be hearing somebody miles away, right? I mean, you have 2,000 people living together. How come I'm not hearing any sound? And when they kept walking, moving towards the Buddha's, the monasteries, then they saw some light in front, and then that's when he realized that Buddhas are among 2,500 disciples sitting in meditation, perfectly silent. I mean, did you imagine that? It's a perfect harmony. Another quality of the Buddha was his kindness. Ananda, his cousin, his personal attendant, right? He went with the Buddha wherever that the Buddha went. He witnessed the Buddhas encountering challenges, answering very difficult questions, even displaying supernatural powers and ability. But at the end of the Buddha's life, in the sutra, Mahaparinibbana, right? He realized that the Buddha was going to enter nirvana very soon. So he couldn't take it. He cried. And he said that he said to himself that the master is about to pass away from me. He who is so kind, 慈悲, right? He is so kind. So these words are of greatest significance. It gave us another dimension in understanding Buddhism, right? The Buddha may have displayed other qualities, but what stood out to Ananda was his compassion, his kindness. Ananda was with him the whole time. Wherever that the Buddha went, Ananda would go with him, and he witnessed a lot of happenings. But yet, one thing that stood out to Ananda was his compassion, his kindness. So he who is so kind, right? That is half of Buddhism in that remark. Of course, we know that Buddhism as wisdom, but that's one story. The other story is compassion. And to understand Buddhism in dry language, classification of terms, analysis of terminology, that is just one aspect of it. But we should also understand the other aspect, which is compassion. So Buddhism was not just wisdom, but also love and compassion exemplified by the Buddha's life. And of course, what that means is when we study Buddhism and try to attain enlightenment, we should attain wisdom and enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings and not just for ourselves. Right? So the Bodhisattva way is telling us that to pursue liberation, 解脱, right? 解脱, to pursue liberation for the sake of all beings, all sentient beings, and not just for ourselves. So these two together, wisdom and compassion, form the Bodhisattva ideal, Bodhisatta, Bodhisatta. It could be said that Ananda was the first exemplar of the Buddha's ideal because he looked at the Buddha and he delayed his own enlightenment. He didn't attain arhatship until after the Buddha had entered nirvana, right? And he went around from place to place preaching the Dhamma, but there were some people who criticized him for that. But then that was the spirit of Bodhisattva, right? The spirit of the Bodhisattva ideal. Right? It is sometimes suggested that Ananda delayed his own development for the sake of taking care of the Buddha because he was the Buddha's personal attendant. And therefore, he didn't gain enlightenment until after the Buddha's death. This kind of thinking is rather superficial because it suggests that service is not part of spiritual development. Right? To criticize Ananda in this way is to not recognize the importance of service, helping other people. And helping other people is part of the development of our enlightenment. Right? It's not just about studying the Buddhism and to gain our enlightenment, but to serve others. The purpose of becoming a Buddha is to help other people. And that's the spirit of Bodhisattva. So let's talk briefly about Bodhisattva ideal and Mahayana Buddhism. We don't know exactly where this ideal originally started, but it later on evolved to become its own movement. At the beginning, there was, Thank you for. You should have told me earlier. So the Buddha, we don't know exactly when Bodhisattva ideal came into existence or originated, but somehow evolved and became its own movement. But it does resonate with Mahayana Buddhism and not so much with Hinayana, Sao Cheng. Mahayana is called great vehicle, and Hinayana is the lesser way, a small vehicle, if you will. Within 100 of years after the Buddhas had entered Nirvana, over time, the Arhat ideal degenerated until it came to signify a narrow, individualistic conceptions of enlightenment. Somehow, the meaning of arhatship turned into a personal salvation and not for the sake of others. Mahayanas were not satisfied with this conceptions because that to them there is something more than just personal development, personal liberation. And that became known as Bodhisattva ideal. There are no records, but we can perhaps extrapolate from the accounts given by some Chinese pilgrims, such as Xuanzang, right? Xuanzang. He went to India for a number of years, 17 or 20 years, to study Buddhism, and he witnessed what was happening in Buddhist society. And he observed that that approximately the same that they were observing the same monastic rules. They were living together. Mahayana and Theravada, Hinayana, living together. The only difference was they studied their own way. But somehow that split. And Hinayana schools ignored Mahayana. They only knew of Shakyamuni Buddha. They did not acknowledge other bodhisattvas or other great Buddhas in the universe. The only Buddha they only acknowledge Shakyamuni Buddha and Maitreya Buddha, the future Maitreya Bodhisattva, the future Buddha, Amida Pusa, Yilak Bota. So the only Hinayana schools remain today is Theravada to the present time. So over the years, they became geographically isolated too. Theravada took a foothold in Sri Lanka, and that's where the Pali Canon was first written down and is preserved into today. And the quasi-Mahayanistic schools, which gained a foothold in Sri Lanka, but eventually it declined too. And in the King Parakama, eventually suppressed in the 12th century. So Theravada was at the south, and Mahayana migrated to the north. Mahayana Buddhism spread to Tibet, China, Japan, and became dissociated from its Hinayana's monastic basis. So it split, not only in studies, but also in geography. The two trends in Buddhism came to develop completely in different ways. So, but in Mahayana, we have this Bodhisattva ideal, and that's what we want to explore more on. So how does one become a Bodhisattva? And how does one achieve the realization of this spiritual ideal? Well, one simple answer is that one becomes a bodhisattva in the direction towards enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings. That's one main difference between Hinayana, 小乘, right, 小乘, and Mahayana, 大乘, 大乘. Is one is pursuing enlightenment for self, the other one is pursuing enlightenment for all sentient beings. And that is called the Bodhi mind, the Bodhi mind, Pusti Xin, right? There's a term called Bodhisitta Pada, which is cause rise to the Bodhi mind. Bodhi means enlightenment, Puti, Bodhi. And Sita means the mind, the heart. And Upada means to cause rise to. So what is this Bodhisattva? Well, it's very difficult to say exactly what it is. Perhaps we may understand it from the angle of understanding what it is not, to try to understand what it is. When we say the Bodhi heart, this translation is unsatisfactory because it suggests that it's a mental state, right? It's emotional. But Bodhisitta, Putishin, Bodhitam, it's not some mental state, it's not emotion. And it's not a person's will to do something. And it's not a personal consciousness. It's not like I'm going to have the Bodhi mind. It's not that. Bodhisitta represents a manifestation of something transcendental. It's something that goes beyond our six senses. Something transcendental coming to us and we resonate from it. Even though it's not a personal thing, but it doesn't mean that we don't have it. We resonate with it, but it does not belong to us personally. Arising of the Bodhisatta is a profound spiritual experience. And it's not like I have my own Bodhisatta, you have your own, he has her own, she has her own, that we all have different Bodhisatta. It's not like you have your own thoughts, I have my own thoughts. Sometimes our thoughts coincide. But that's not it. Bodhisatta does not belong to anybody specifically. But it doesn't belong to anybody, but it is part of everybody. Bodhisatta is more likely to arise in a spiritual community when we have intense mutual spiritual friendship and encouragement. Bodhisatta has the conditions to come to surface. And that doesn't mean that we cannot develop our own. Doesn't mean that we need a spiritual community in order to develop that. And it is still possible for us to make our own progress. But in a spiritual community, we also have the opportunities to develop, to cause rise to Bodhisatta. So Bodhisatta is a supra individual, not a collective concept, not a collective thing, meaning that just because of people coming together doesn't mean Bodhisatta will automatically will surface. But it has to come from, there needs to be conditions. And it's not individual, it doesn't belong to anybody, but it's not collective. It doesn't belong to a group. But it evolves from the higher level of consciousness, from a number of people with that consciousness. Right? Last time we talked about the evolution of consciousness. We have the basic, the rudimentary consciousness where it's very reactive. You don't think, you just react. That's very basic level of consciousness. Does it make sense? Right? And then the second is you have self-awareness. You're aware of your emotions. You have some sense of control. And then the next level is transcendental consciousness, where you move beyond the ego, beyond 自我, 德言. Right? You move beyond that. You're transcendental. So you can say there are three levels. this Bodhisitta here is from the higher level of consciousness, not basic, not just a group of people coming together and then you have Bodhisitta. But there needs to be a higher transcendental level of consciousness. Bodhisitta is not somebody's individual achievement or possession, right? And an example that in the sutra was you have 500 people with 500 umbrellas. They made the offerings of the umbrellas to the Buddha. And the Buddha put it all together to become one big canopy. So all the pieces coming together, then you have a big picture. So you can think of it that way. But that doesn't mean that you take 500 units and you mesh into become one. It's only one. It's not, you don't mesh all 500 and become one. But here it says that the one canopy represents quite different order of experience, transcending the concept of sameness and difference altogether. It's not the same, it's not like you have now one single item and you don't have 500 separate items. So Buddhism sees reality as being essentially diversified, being very broad, many, as having unity in difference and difference in unity, right? One in many, many in one. In the Avatamsaka Sutra, Hua Yan Jing, right? Illustrates a simile where beams of light, different colors, they intersect each other, they're passing through, but they don't interfere with each other, they don't cancel each other out. So not that everything is reduced to one, but at the same time, there is unity. So Sankarasita is saying difference reveals unity, and unity makes difference possible. So what does this mean? What do you mean? I can understand difference reveal unity, meaning you have different things, and you can see each one making up that difference. What do you think about unity makes difference possible? What does that mean? Any idea? I'm not sure I quite understand this. Maybe for us to think about. What do you think? Difference reveals unity, meaning a unit. You have different, because of differences, you can see that each one has its own characteristics. But in unity makes difference possible. What do you think that means? Well, maybe how I see this is perhaps because of this unity that it allows differences to exist. I don't know, that's my interpretation of it. Is it? Yeah.
Beautiful. The different unity is the because in the world, when we say that it's all different, the unity it's all different, but it's available for any person's available what they want. But actually, what I know is that the different unity is a one. It's only one unity. Mm-hmm. That means is a different unity means different desire. Is from different desire, and then they come with different unity. So how the different unity is the one is the available to people who open the eyes to focus in front of us right now. But like you said before, is a Bodhisattva and a Bodhisattva is the Bodhishin. Mm-hmm. It's actually I feel is the people's from original heart we natural have at the beginning. And later we missed it because the whole of the desire, that like people's selfish. So that's why we following our vision, following our what hearing, and following the desire. So we from our desire to one unity, and we saw all of the different unity is available for any person. We how to say that is the we because we missed the put it
Yes. Oh, yeah, okay. So what I think I heard you said is that we are different. We have different desires. We are different.
Yes.
We might have come from different backgrounds, but we are united because of our petition, because
Yes.
of our bodhisitta.
Bodhisitta, yes.
Yeah, because of there's something right, of unity among us for us to come together as one. Right? But we are different because we have different pursuit, and because of this commonality, the unity that binds us, right? Maybe
Right.
That's a good thought. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so Sankarsita broke this bodhisitta into two categories. One is absolute, and one's relative. Absolute is, he says that not very much you can say about this because it's beyond our thoughts. We cannot talk too much about it because it's supposed to be beyond speech and beyond language. But some people do try to explain this Da Buti Xin, right? Maybe absolute here is Da Buti Xin, Dai Bodhidam. Some people try to explain it as something as sunyata, which is emptiness, or Xin Kong, Kong Dan. And perhaps, but here it says that it is the essence of this is compassion, and it's not a blank, featureless, inert absolute. So this absolute here, although we call it emptiness, but it's not empty, right? Emptiness does not mean nothing. And it cannot be touched, soiled, and cannot be shaken. And it transcends both time and space. So this absolute, this Da Buti Xin, right? This absolute bodhisitta transcends both time and space. And although identical with reality itself, but it is beyond. It is beyond the relative, beyond the oppositions of change and change. But it's not static, it's not fixed. In fact, it's not a thing at all. There's no thing that's called bodhisitta. Emptiness here we should understand as conditionality, right? Yuan qi or yun kai. It's not that there is something called ultimate reality. It's just that the ultimate reality itself is the process of change, the potential to change. That's ultimate. It's not fixed. For example, there's a concept of fixed is the soul, the spirit. Some people understand that there is a fixed soul. You have your soul, I have my soul. And they believe in reincarnation, but they believe also in a fixed soul. They believe that after this life, they'll reborn as another life with a different body, might have a different name, in a different country, different place, but the soul is the same. Just like put on a dress. You put on different shirt, different clothes every day, but you yourself still the same. So that's the thinking of fixed soul. Buddhism, of course, rejects that. There's nothing that's fixed, but at the same time, it's not completely different. Every time you transition, you don't become a completely different person, but you're not the same person. You have evolved and changed. Does it make sense? Emptiness here is conditionality, is change. Ability to change. It's empty because it's not fixed. Because if this computer was fixed, I cannot change anything. But the computer itself is not fixed. It's a composition of different components and different usage. Like I cannot use this computer to build a house, to hammer a nail, I'll break it. It does not have that feature. But I could probably melt this and extract the metal from it to form a hammer, maybe a small hammer. now it has its form, so it can change, it can evolve, right? It does make sense?
Question is, you see the empty, can I see the empty is a Bodhisitta, Bodhishin?
Here it's trying to here it's saying that the great Bodhisitta is emptiness. Emptiness in the sense that it is not a thing. Because if it was a thing, then you cannot change it. It's always this, you cannot change it. So you can say that, but understanding that there is not a thing called emptiness, but of conditions evolved among a group of beings with higher consciousness. So we'll go into that in a little bit. If this is the question, we can discuss. So that's somebody trying to help us understand what is Bodhisitta. So they categorize, okay, that's the great Bodhisitta, and then there's the smaller relative Bodhisitta. Perhaps we may be able to understand this more with the relative Bodhisitta. Relative Bodhisitta may be more understandable. Maybe we can probably understand this more accessible to us with the reflection of the absolute Bodhisitta. Of course, with every examples, we should understand that there are limitations, right? The imagery, there are limitations in every example. So we should not just literally take to be truth, but we should understand that it helps us to illustrate a point. So the example here is you have the moon and you have the water on the ground. So the moon represents like the absolute Bodhisitta, and the reflections of the moon in the pond, in the water, is relative. So for us, we see Buddha and we are inspired to become the Buddha. So that we are casting rise to that enlightenment, right? We have not achieved yet, but we are reflecting, right? And the relative Bodhisitta represents the path, and the absolute Bodhisitta represents the goal, it says, right? We developed our own Bodhisitta, our own relative Bodhisitta to achieve the ultimate, so-called ultimate, right? So that's the goal. From the beginning, the two are different, but at the end, when the path leads to the destination, it's the same, right? But the beginning of the path is not the same. But you move along the path, when you get to the end, you can say they're the same. The path and the goal are the same. But at the beginning, you cannot say that. And here it says that we need to take this with extreme care, because otherwise this can be a serious mistake, because it will destroy the foundation of our spiritual life. Meaning that if we see that the path and the goal is the same, then I don't need to do anything. I'm destroying my own foundation because I'm not putting effort into it, right? So they're neither the same or different. When one does not put in the efforts to reach the goal, thinking that they're the same, then that's the foundation of cultivation is destroyed. Even though we know that they're the same, that we should still put in the effort. We know that they're different, but that doesn't mean there's no relation to us. The reality towards which we are progressing is not foreign to us, meaning that the Bodhisitta, although we don't have it, but it's not outside of us. It's not in us. It's not a personal possession, but it's not outside of us either. Because if it was, you couldn't progress towards it, right? If you didn't have any kind of relations to it. So in a sense, absolute Bodhisitta is the absolute dimensions of something that's already within us, experienced us by us in a relative manner. Does it make sense? Right? Does it make sense? So Bodhisitta is more than a thought. It's more than just emotion, a thought of enlightenment. But it's transcendental. It's supernatural. Supra-individual nature. It's dynamic, and that's the will to enlightenment. So Bodhisitta is not inside us, but and it's some sort of a cosmic will, meaning of nature, right? The universe. Cosmo is the universe. But of course, again, this is just an example that we should not take literally. Even though there's the will at work in the universe of this Bodhisitta towards liberation, enlightenment for all sentient beings, but we should not take this literally, because it's not like something out there is controlling us. We're not being controlled by this Bodhisitta somewhere out there in the universe. Does it make sense? So we don't possess it. It's somewhere out there, but it's also in us. But when we say it's out somewhere out there that's coming to us, I don't mean to say that we're being controlled by it, that we relinquish our freedoms, that we're like a robot being controlled by this Bodhisitta. So, and those of whom the Bodhisitta takes possession, as it were, those in whom this Bodhisattva arises, or within whom it manifests, becomes Bodhisattva. Bodhisattva, Pusa, is when there is Bodhisitta in him or her. But that doesn't mean that he or she is being controlled by this Bodhisitta. So it isn't that you become a passive machine being operated from the outside, right? Like you're being controlled. But you're being transformed into something transcendental. Transcendental that is developed in you, comes into you. He gave an example. For example, you care about somebody very much, you loved somebody very much, and they asked you to do something. So if the task that you're doing, is that their will or is it your will? Right? You want to do something to help somebody who has asked you a favor. When you do that task, is that your will or is it somebody else's will? Well, he said it's difficult to say because it's a combination of both, right? You somehow make their will to become your will. You help them because you're happy to help them. Because if he didn't ask you to do something, you wouldn't have done it. But you went ahead and did it because you care about it. So you made that will to be your will. So it blends in, becomes blended with yours. You take somebody else's will and it blends with yours. And if, for example, if you're in a spiritual environment with a guru, 善知识, right, 行基thức, and they ask you to do something, they teach you something new, and it's a new direction in your spiritual life, you genuinely take their will upon yourself. You study it, you follow it. So they want you to study this, but at the same time, you want to do the same, following that same direction, right? So you're taking that to become yours. Or perhaps the Buddha's in front of us asking us to do something. And we essentially will take the Buddha's will into ours. Like we read from the Buddha's scriptures and we aspire to follow the Bodhisattva path. So we take that and we make it ours. But it didn't come from us originally. We learned that from reading the sutras. But now we have turned that into our own motivation. Does it make sense? Not only your will, but your whole being, your emotions, your thinking becomes one in that path. Right? So to the extent that transcendental dimension has entered into your existence, right, your phenomenal being transformed into being of a bodhisattva. Right? You'll become a being of enlightenment. And that provides the basis of our whole being now, because our being is being transformed. And it becomes blended with us. What does this mean? How do we achieve that? How do we realize the Bodhisattva ideal in us, the Bodhisitta in us? Well, we have to really put into practice. You can't just read books. You can't just read a lecture, attend lectures, and read scriptures and say you have the Bodhisitta. But you have to put into practice and you have to experience it. right? Your whole thinking, your whole being has to be on that path too, right? So we should not take Bodhisitta to be a sort of a doctrine or a theory. It's not something to, it's not like a lessons to learn. But he said that it's really a myth. He used the word myth, which is kind of interesting. But I think what he means here is the spirit of enlightenment. And that is transcendental experience. It's something that moves us and stirs us very deep inside at a very deep level. But yet it's myth in a sense that in a sense that does not exist on the physical plane. He uses the word myth here not to mean that it doesn't exist or it's false or it's imaginary, but it doesn't exist on the physical plane. For example, like the dreams. Your dreams. When you're awake, you don't remember your dreams. And when you are dreaming, you don't have consciousness of your physical body, of your daily life during the day. But yet, doesn't mean your dreams are not you. And when you're awake, doesn't mean you don't have dreams. But your dreams don't occur at the physical level. Does it make sense? But yet, there is some that is part of you. So, and also with meditation too, you sit in meditation or you're in a meditation retreat, like 4-qi, a retreat. 7 days of chanting, right? Meditation. When you sit, it doesn't look like there's much going on. But in our mind, our consciousness, it's being transformed. Right? So we don't see it on the physical plane, but in the consciousness, at the level of the consciousness, it is changing. And so that's what he means by myth. In the spirit, we don't see that, but it's there. And he says that myth comes into being when people have strong feelings about something, or the aspiration. You have a strong motivation for something. Mahayana Buddhists feel like there is a need to create this, to illustrate this higher level of existence. And that's what they try to illustrate at. And there is a necessity to illustrate because we, out of this physical body that we see on a physical plane, we don't see our mind, we don't see our aspiration, but it does exist, right? So Mahayana is trying to illustrate things that you don't physically see, like the terms Bodhisitta. There's more than that. Like Bodhisattva Buddhism, there's more to the terms. Okay. We have so much theoretical knowledge getting in the way of that inspiration. We have motivation deep inside us for something. And it's beyond our personal situation, beyond the physical plane. And when we have such a strong emotion, we project that in the form of myth. So myth here does not mean it doesn't exist, but we need a way, a softer way of illustrating it, something that does not have physical characteristics to it. For example, you see this beautiful flower. If you only see, you can say it's a lotus flower, but somebody may look at it and say, wow, that is a beautiful, radiant lotus flower, right? It's the same thing, but you're adding your emotion in it. Does it make it wrong? No. It's your projection. It's how you feel, how you think. So the same thing when we study Buddhism, we look at life and death, just like the story of Kisa Gautami. Right? When we look at life, we just don't see the form only, but we understand the meaning of it. What causes it to come to existence? And what can cause it to move out of existence? For example, if you like something, let's say you like investment. If your investment goes up and you feel happy, then your happiness is being dependent on the rising of the investment, on that investment. Meaning that your happiness is not your own, but your happiness is because of investment. But you know that if your happiness rides on that investment, if it goes down, your happiness will go down with it. Just like the wave. The wave goes up if you're happy, but you know that it's going to come down. So when we look at this, we should not feel bad or we don't invest anymore. But we should understand the purpose of your investment. Why you feel happy? Are you happy because of that? Because if you are happy because of that, then your happiness is at the mercy of that. And you should expect the opposite. So it's relative. So when we study conditionality, we understand why things come into existence and why things will move out of existence. Right? We just don't see it. Like your happy feelings. You don't just say, oh, I'm observing my awareness. I know I'm feeling happy. But that's not good enough. We have to move one step further to understand why happiness occurs and what can take that happiness away. And by providing the conditions to sustain that happiness, by providing the conditions, happiness will occur. So if we don't like being stuck in the cycle of life and death, then we should not provide the conditions for the will to continue. Meaning don't continue to push the wheel of cycle of life and death for it to continue to rotate, but stop pushing it. Of course, stop pushing it doesn't mean stop living, but we live without fear, right? Live in a sense that it's meaningful and live our lives without anxieties because we don't get stuck with something, right? We don't ride a wave, but we are above it. Whether it rises or it falls, it doesn't impact our happiness because you're already happy. Doesn't mean you'll have less happiness. It's just that you're already full. There's no more to add and no more to be taken away. Right? So when we study Buddhism, we should go beyond the form. Right? 现象, go beyond the form, but to see the conditionality behind it. So how do we cause rise to Bodhisitta? How do we develop it? And how do we become a Bodhisattva? Well, it happens through the rising of the glorious Bodhisitta. And how do we do that? In his book, Santideva says that it's like a blind man finding a priceless jewel in a dung hill at night. Who would think that we would find this priceless jewel? In other words, we live our normal life, going to work, making a living. We're going to meditation classes, going to lectures. And then it happens to us that we have this cause rise to Bodhisitta. It can happen to us. Right? So when it happens to us, it's like finding a jewel, a diamond in a pile of trash at night. How lucky are we? So it's wonderful and unexpected, but it's not an accident, right? You just don't go to class. Suddenly, one day, you have this Bodhisitta. It's not by chance. It's not the will of God. It's not, it's just natural. But there are causes and conditions why we have this Bodhisitta. And of course, this is all because of really preparation. And it depends upon the creation of certain mental and spiritual conditions. We have to create the conditions for this to come to fruition. In other words, we have to live our spiritual life. We have to live a life with preparation for it to come. So we shouldn't be too much in a hurry. Shouldn't have a lot of anxiety in getting quick results, but to provide the foundations, the preparation, It's like meditation. You just don't rush, driving on a freeway like a mad driver, trying to get here so you can sit in meditation. You wave your fist at the driver who cuts in front of you. You say, "Get out of my way. I'm on my class to study compassion and to practice meditation." That's not going to help you because you're not doing the preparation for it to come. But it should be the environment, your mood, you're inside and you're outside. The room should be serene, should be clean, right? No noise, no distractions. Your heart, your mind has to be receptive to it. The secret lies in the preparation. So the same with arising of the Bodhisitta. So it's not like something that you can force. It's something that you can force to happen. But these factors here are within our control. Even though we cannot force it to happen, doesn't mean that we don't have control of it. We do, there is some control. And then control is by providing the conditions, right? Providing the environment for it to grow. And no one can live our spiritual life for us. We have to do it ourselves. We have to experience it. We have to live it. And we have to be receptive to it. For example, this lightning rod, right? Tall building, you have this metal pole called lightning rod. I mean, you cannot force the lightning to occur. All you can do is set up the environment, put up the rod, a metal rod, to conduct electricity. Only when all the conditions are there, meaning you have a storm passing by, and then the lightning has to strike for you to conduct electricity. So when we practice Buddhism and we want to cause rise to Bodhisitta, we have to build that foundation, make the preparation, but we don't know when it's going to happen. It will occur, but we just don't know when, and it will occur. But unless you set up all the preparation, you won't have it, right? Just like this lightning rod, if you don't have the rod, you don't know when lightning's going to occur, and you say, well, I'm not going to put it up. Well, when lightning strikes, you're not going to conduct electricity. But if you put up a lightning rod, doesn't mean that electricity will be there, because there's no lightning, there's no storm. So same thing, we want to cause rise to Bodhisitta, we have to build that foundation, make that preparation. So we at present, we cannot force anything to occur. We just have to set up the conditions and wait, right? We can choose the right place for the lightning for a lightning conductor, and we can make it the right shape with the right material, so on and so forth. But we cannot pull the lightning from the sky, right? We cannot say, okay, my room is clean, I'm going to sit and meditate, I expect to have Bodhisitta arising in me. That doesn't work that way. So when we practice Buddhism and it seems like there's nothing happening, perhaps may seem like we're not making any progress at all, but we should not give up. Because we don't know, perhaps one day when we sit down, just the fact of letting go or sitting down causes rise to your Bodhisitta, right? Or when you've done the preparation and you drive down the road and you see something, a leaf falling, or a beggar and whatnot, or a monk or whatever it is, that's transcendental to you, right? Or you see this lotus flower. Maybe you don't see it now, but perhaps days later, when the conditions are there and the preparation is complete, when you see this radiant lotus flower, it causes rise to your Bodhisitta, right? But without the preparation, you can look at this all day long and you may not be able to see it. So how do we set up the conditions? Well, there are many ways, different methods in arising of the Bodhisitta. But the crucial point to remember here is that we have to give ourselves to it wholeheartedly. We have to be receptive to it, willing to receive. And we have to make a definite effort in some particular areas, whether it's giving, ethics, meditation, generosity, whatever it is that we're studying, we have to put in our whole heart into it. your heart and soul into it. One way that Santideva suggested was to attend maybe simply a puja, which is a Fa Hui, right? And commit yourself to a spiritual life, be part of that, where you become without fear of being or becoming. And the would-be bodhisattva has no worries. When you're committed to something, you're not being distracted by other things. So you're not bothered by it, and therefore you don't have the worries because you are committed to a path, and therefore you are not being distracted. So when you're committed, however life is happening, it does not distract you. Good or bad, it does not distract you. It's not like when life is good, you stop practicing, or when life is bad, you start running to the Buddha for help. If you're still wondering what to do with your life, he says, then you will remain unsure, unclear, and unconfident. But once you have made up your mind, you're committed, then there's no fear, there's no worry. So from this, we can say that spiritual life is not that difficult. Perhaps the worldly life is more difficult because there's a lot of worries, there's a lot of uncertainties. And you don't know where you're going to get it, realize that investment. But in spirituality, when you sit and attain meditation, you know it is meditation, right? You know that's something that within your control. And sometimes it is less trouble just to lead a spiritual life. Maybe perhaps being committed to our spiritual life is less troublesome than living a worldly life. From another perspective, Vasubandhu, he says that when we look at the Buddha started off with the same ignorance and weaknesses as we do. So if the Buddha can make it, we can make it. So it gives us some sort of confidence and faith in us. And thinking about the Buddha helps us to cultivate our positivity, the positivity in the mind. And it helps us to move away from unskillful actions. And by recollecting the Buddhas in our mind, 念佛, right? 念佛, we become convinced that enlightenment is possible because we keep thinking about the positivity. We're going to be motivated towards that positivity. And if it's possible, then it is possible for the Buddha, it is possible for us. So by contemplating the virtues of the Tathagatas, Rulai, or New Lai, their purity, their peacefulness, their wisdom, their love, we gradually become assimilated to them and approach the goal of enlightenment. We become like them. When we keep thinking about them, it will change us. May not seem like there's much going on physically, but in our mind, aspirations, it's changing us. So these four: energy, detachment, compassion, and becoming one, as it were, with the Buddhas, start to coalesce with our hearts, and the Bodhisitta arises, becomes us. Bodhisitta arises when the conditions are right. The awakening of the heart is achieved, and a Bodhisattva is born. Right? So when we can cast rise to our Bodhisitta, it may be relative, it may not be absolute, but when we can feel it, that we're resonating with something that's more meaningful and higher, then we know that we are on the Bodhisattva way. We're resonating, we're living the Bodhisattva ideal. Right? All right, are there any comments?
Thank you very much, Kenny. I have a quick question. I want to make sure that you say everybody's like whole life study Buddha and stop the desire as they know what is the empty and stop desire, cut all the desire from outside and practice meditations every day, and then can get a Bodhisattva and Bodhisitta. Then after we get a Bodhisitta, then we learn again and can get a Bodhisattva, right? So after putting sofa, then for a long time, then we our heart try to be empty and kept desire, all the desire from the outside, and we know what is desire, and then we become, then we one day we can become Buddha. So it's all right.
Don't think it step by step, but it's like really a loop, because there's no starting point. It's not like you first develop your bodhisattva and then you become a Buddha, bodhisattva. But if you have no concept of bodhisattva or wanting to be one, then there's no bodhisitta. But so it's hard to know where to start. The best thing I think I can offer an advice is to put your heart into it, right? To just surround yourself around spiritual friends. So the question is like, in order to have electricity, should you put up the rod first, or you generate the lightning? But you can't generate lightning. But we just do our best, right? We provide the conditions. We put our whole heart into learning something, and over time it will evolve. So then we'll understand the concepts of emptiness. Again, understanding the concept of emptiness is to understand yuan qi, to understand conditionality. So don't be fooled by language. Empty is not something that doesn't exist or something called emptiness, but it's because it has the potential to change. We can change from mundane fanfu to shengren, to sages, and to become Buddhas. But we should step by step. We don't know tomorrow we could be a Buddha or not. We don't know next life, not sure. But as long as we put in the conditions, put in our heart and soul into learning it, committing ourselves to the path, and walk the path and live the path, eventually we'll get there, right? We shouldn't have to ask, am I there yet? Am I there yet? You keep driving in the right direction, eventually you get there. You will get there. It's not that you must get there because you don't know when, but you will get there. Does that answer your question?
Thank you very much, Kenny. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Are there any comments? Okay. So we talked about the historical origin of Mahayana, which leads to the Bodhisattva I view something more than just dry terms and classifications of Buddhist terminology. And in order to become a Bodhisattva, we need to cultivate that Bodhisitta, the Bodhi mind. Again, mind is not just a thought, emotion, but there's something we resonate with, something that's meaningful, higher. And that is for the sake of all beings, not just for us. We don't know when we're going to get there, but if we continue to march along the way in the right direction, then eventually we'll get there. Right? All right. Let's do merit dedication. If you could please join your palms. Together we recite, may the merits and virtues accrue today adorn the Buddha Pure Lands, repay 4 types of kindness above, and aid those suffering in the paths below. May those who see and hear of this bring forth the resolve for the Bodhi mind. When this retribution body is complete, together we shall meet in the land of ultimate bliss. If you could please rise, we bow to the Buddha 3 times to show our respect. First bow, second bow, and third bow. Amida Society.